What's up, SerpaSquad? Tanner here, and in this one I'm coming at you with another terrarium build. I'm simultaneously juggling several big projects right now, so I felt that it was time to go back to basics with a nice terrarium build. Let's get right into it. No terrarium is complete without a container. I've amassed quite a collection and I have a ton of really cool containers, but I wanted to keep it simple with an old canning jar. I believe I picked it up for 99 cents at Goodwill. These are great containers that are usually inexpensive and they make great terrariums. With the container selected, let's move on to make the false bottom. I've shown you how to make various types of false bottoms, but for this one, we'll do something a little different. I've mentioned this in other videos, but for this project, I'll actually make it happen. What I have here is some coarse filter media for aquariums. Something like this or even fine metallomat are good options for false bottoms. They can easily be cut to size and used without a barrier like we typically would for a gravel false bottom or something like that. However, these materials are kind of expensive, so unless you have excess, they're not the most budget friendly options. Anyway, I marked and cut the media out to the appropriate size. It was dropped right into the jar and pressed in place. Like I said, there's no need for a barrier, so we can move right on to the charcoal layer. As I've explained in many other videos, this layer will help keep the terrarium healthy. You can put in a dedicated layer, mix it into the substrate, or a combination of the two. If you want to learn more about that and the false bottom layer, be sure to check out the video linked up in the card. Once I had a thin layer of charcoal in place, I proceeded to add a few handfuls of my tropical substrate mix. This mix is my go-to for closed terrariums because it's resistant to compaction, drains well, and helps create the optimum environment for a terrarium. I'll put the components for this mix up on screen, but if you follow the card you can see a whole video about how I make it. Now we'll move on to the hardscape. For this one I have a bunch of small pieces of slate stone, which will be my primary material. I also have some manzanita wood, but I'm not sure if I'll even use them. With my material selected, I proceeded to scape. In doing so, I placed several stones side by side to create a little formation of sorts, almost like a miniature mountain. I'll cover a good portion of this up with plants, and there are none better for the job than moss. I chose a few patches from one of my propagation bins that I felt would create some nice contrast and complement the slate stone. Plus, as you know, I like moss. Is any terrarium really complete without it? The first one I'm going with is the badge moss. This one will really help soften the back edge of the rock formation and allow me to seamlessly transition into the foreground. In the foreground I went with some liverwort. Unlike moss, these will create a really subtle texture to cover the ground. This will help me make a design that draws the eye throughout and not just to a single element. After these were placed, I proceeded to add the remainder of the moss to blur the line between the badge moss and the liverwort. Next up is a small rattlesnake fern. These actually get quite large, but it's easy to keep them pruned to a size that's suitable for a small terrarium. I wanted the fern proudly placed atop the formation, so to get it in place I had to remove a section of the moss and nestle it down in the rocks. After getting it into position, I could move the moss back to its rightful location. Then I got a few cuttings of Alternanthera Ficordia Red Bitsy to plant next to the fern. These will add a nice pop of color, and in time they should really help fill in the space. Lastly, I added a few sections of Anubias Nana Petite as accents. Unfortunately, I lost that part of the footage, but you get the idea. Once they were in place, I finalized the scape by adding some tiny pieces of slate to create more texture and a better sense of scale. Now that the terrarium is fully scaped, I'll add about a teaspoon of dechlorinated tap water. Sometimes I'll use a sprayer for the initial watering, but pipettes are a great solution as well because you can selectively hydrate the plants. When I do this, I'll primarily water the plants that are prone to drying out while building the terrarium. After that, I picked up a section of a microfiber cloth with my tweezers and carefully cleaned the interior of the jar. You could use a paper towel for this process as well, but microfiber will allow you to get a cleaner surface. Speaking of keeping things clean, the terrarium will be completed with the addition of Springtails. They're not required, but these little guys will help deal with any potential mold outbreaks and help keep the terrarium clean. In case you want to learn more about them, I'll link a whole video about them up in the card. Once they were safely in their new home, the terrarium was sealed up. And that's a wrap. I don't know about you, but I really like how this terrarium turned out. It's simple, effective, and looks pretty cool if you ask me. Like I said early on in the video, my goal with this one was to go back to basics and make a simple terrarium. I was able to make it exclusively with materials that I already had, so I didn't have to go out of my way to set it up. By this point I've shown you all sorts of cheap, budget-friendly options, but I'll be back in a few weeks with something a little more high-tech. If you want to see more builds like this one or the one I was just talking about, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on future uploads. Also, if you liked the video and haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to give the video a thumbs up. As always, SerpaSquad, I'm thankful for your continued support and patience as I work through other projects I'm currently working on. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.